Great day in the morning, as I said the other day. Welcome to Nikos. I'm Jonathan Albin. I am Game Master Jay, and we are here on Game Master's Soapbox. And the dire news that we are possibly reaching the end of role playing as you know it is upon us. And I don't mean to be the bearer of bad tidings, and as a matter of fact, I would say I'm a bringer of glad tidings because the end of role playing, as you know, it means role playing is evolving. And those of you that are not yet familiar with the Nikos RPG, let me tell you, we are talking about a whole other ball game when it comes to role playing. We're going to be talking about that today in some detail, and so let's get right after it, shall we? Before we go there, though, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and if you like what you see, make sure you click the subscribe button, click the bell, and you get all the notifications of all the new releases. And also, if you would give a like and leave a comment for us on the video so that we are aware of what's going on. Now, this is being recorded on Twitch, so if you are online with me on Twitch and you wish to, feel free to drop a chat in because I am actually reading the chats and I will read your chat on the air and respond to it near the end of the broadcast. So let's go after this, though. What is it when I say that we are talking about the end of role playing as we know it? Well, one of the things that has defined role playing games for most players is the concept of having to spend a few minutes at the beginning of the character's life, if you will, and occasionally throughout, you have to make decisions about what class you're going to advance in. And the concept here is that there will be no more classes. In the future, role playing will be more realistic in that it will be treated the same way we treat our lives. We do not choose a specific pathway and ignore all else to pursue it. Far from that. As a matter of fact, even if we did, we would still not have the limitations of not being allowed to take on other skills. We'd be able to advance in any direction that we choose to. And so a mechanism that will be coming up will be getting rid of classes. It will be getting rid of the concept of hit point pools. It'll be getting rid of experience points. It will be giving an endless advancement opportunity to every character in any way that the player chooses. There will be no longer any genre limitations, so your character could be theoretically played in a fantasy setting in one week and in a space fantasy setting the next, all depending on the choices of your storytellers and game masters. But even the dice roll and combat systems that you're familiar with are all going to change. And the NycosRPG mechanism is a way that's going to happen. And I will be going over each one of these points in a great amount of detail as we go through today's broadcast. So I want to thank you all for being here, and let's get after it. So when I say that there will be no more classes, one of the biggest challenges when you create a character is you have to make a decision, a hard decision, really, if you think about it when you're first starting to play, to choose which channel, which narrow band of skills you want your persona in the game to pursue. In classic Dungeons and Dragons, you had fighters, wizards, thieves, clerics, and then you had some specialty ones that might be added as well, the paladin and the ranger and such like. But the classes were a restriction because once you started down that path, the skills and abilities you would advance in would be dedicated to that specific line of work, if you will. And although we all get used to that in our play life nowadays, many of the online RPs and such have classes and such. There has been a move within that marketplace to move away from that and to give characters more options. As a matter of fact, even inside the Dungeons and Dragons model itself, there have been changes in the recent editions and recent releases to allow, for example, an arcane knight or an arcane trickster or a warrior you can have different classes with skills from other places, but it got muddled and confusing and ultimately was a problem anyway. So by avoiding classes at the very beginning, you give your character more freedom to advance in any direction they want to right from the very first session. So this also obviates the need for having to look up your advancements each time to see what your new bonuses are, because this system isn't going to be limited by class features and the like, and so you won't have to keep referring to those. As a matter of fact, you'll know what your particular skill is week over week, and we'll get more into that as we get further down in this sequence. Just realize that the loss of classes, while it may seem like a loss of direction, I remember the first time I even conceived of this, the idea of not having a class was so alien to my own mind that it took some grinding to get to how we could do it. And the way we've done that is that you have ways of training that are still aligned with the old kinds of class structure, but they're literally only as a framework of how you might have learned a particular skill. You might have learned it from somebody who had a career that was tangential to those old titles. But we'll get more into that later. Now, the next one is probably the more challenging one to get your brain around, and that is that there are no more hit points. And this is because most of us are not even aware of the origin of the hit point pool concept. The game has been around for 48 or so years. As long as I've been playing, there's been a game, because I literally learned from one of the guys who designed Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s. And at that time, one of the biggest going concerns, I know it's going to sound crazy, was what they called at the time classic tabletop war games. And in those war games, you would have a points score allotted to your logistics. And many times the conflict objective was to eliminate your opponent's logistics pool before your own was depleted or destroyed. And the reason for that was because during World War II, and this is 1940s, during World War II, we realized pretty early in the war that the easiest way to defeat an opponent wasn't necessarily to match him on the battlefield with the best units and the best shells and the best armor. It was to determine what was allowing them to be a war-fighting system, deplete them of one or more of their resources, and thereby prevent them from being able to continue the war effort. This concept of depletion is also sometimes called resource refusal, or you are eliminating their resource supply chains. And when you use a supply chain warfighting, you're going after not the enemy's positions militarily, but their oil depots or their hardware repair facilities or their production for ammunition, munitions dumps. And you can actually see this if you go back and look at classic World War II era movies. Almost always they are going after one or another of these resources as their objective. And even if they are going unit versus unit, they still are going for that which allows them to continue. So they are blowing up the munitions dump, or they're lighting their fuel on fire or whatever. But this concept is the part that you have to understand. When you are trying to emulate that in a war game, you create a arbitrary number, usually built on actual numeric things like how many barrels of oil they might have at a depot, or the number of ammunition cases they can produce in a month. It all depends on the scale. But you're doing this so that you can determine what the threshold for victory will be. How much of what they have do you have to take away to stop them from fighting? Because once you take away their ability to war fight, they will surrender. And that concept is what carried over into Dungeons and Dragons. I know it seems a far afield from it now, but that concept is exactly where the concept of hit points came from. A character's hit points were his, in effect, ability to warfight. So if you eliminate a player's hit points, you're effectively taking away their resource pool and therefore causing them to be able to no longer fight. This is why when Dungeons and Dragons first started and they talked about the combat rounds and being a flurry of activity, and a round was a minute, I know it seems crazy now. We think of a round being 6 seconds, but initially a round was a full minute, and if your storyteller was into dynamics, he would grant you segments of your round. So you would be your action would go off in the based on your initiative, the X segment of that round. And therefore it was how many seconds after the start of the clock, so to speak. And for example, spellcasters, nowadays spellcasters will freak out at this, but back in my day, take my teeth out, act like I'm 90 years old. Back in my day, when you were a spellcaster, the level of your spell was how many rounds, how many combat rounds you would have to continue to be casting for the spell to go off. This is early on. This changed rapidly when they realized that players were perceiving of the die rolls being their attack in each round, and that's when they started to switch from the 1 minute round to the 60-second, the 10-second round, and all of that. They got all confusing. But the concept here is that the hit point pool was this target that you were aiming at, and you were trying to deplete your opponent's hit points and therefore keep them from war fighting. And this therefore meant that your character didn't necessarily die when he reached 0, because they were emulating on the warfighting style in war games the concept of breaking a unit. When you demoralized it and made it so that it was no longer wanting to fight, it was removed from the field of play. Not that it was eliminated, but it simply was taken out of action because it was no longer serviceable. And these are all terms that, in an antiseptic and analytic tabletop way, made perfect sense. When you switch it up to a role-playing game and a player goes to 0 hit points, if you have a point before 0 that you could convince a unit to not fight anymore, you could probably do that. But we as human beings think, well, I could play all the way down to the last point, and therefore character death became a thing. Idea was you played until the numbers ran out, and if you were doing it right, if you were playing well, you were depleting your opponent's hit points and stopping them before they took away your hit points. And what the NycosRPG does instead is it considers the life essence of a person to be more like a barometer. We fundamentally can operate all the way until 0. I mean, we can keep fighting until we are literally knocked out. But that's generally not how physical conflict, even in a situation of a gunfight, doesn't necessarily happen that way. You keep going until somebody wins or somebody loses, and then you're done. And it's hard to define that using a hit point system, because a player is simply going to say, I still have points left, I can still go. I'm ready to fight on and carry forward. When you take that away and you say, no, you can continue to act, but the longer you refuse to act, the more strenuous, the longer you continue to act, the more strain you're putting on your system, to the point where you become so fatigued that you can't continue and you literally have to rest. And that even doesn't finish it. That just means you cannot in that round of rest physically harm your opponent, even if you quote win the engagement, because you're not prepping a weapon and you're not ready for the fight. So it causes the back and forth of the dynamics of the combat to radically change. And we'll go more into this when we get down to the penultimate section, when we get down to dealing with QDR and things like that. But we're not going to cover right now. Make sure you stick around to the end for that. The concept here is that your hit points pools are gone. So a fight scene is not going to be taking the 2 hours, 3 hours, or more that it's taking now, because players won't have these monstrous amounts of hit points at moderately high level that make it difficult to follow through and complete on. It will be instead much shorter and much more cinematic. We'll get more to that in a minute. Now, these are all things that seem to be going away. No more classes, no more hit points. Now we're going to talk about no more experience points. Wait, I'm not getting any more experience points? I'm doing all of this? What am I doing all this for if I'm not getting experience points? Well, first of all, let me first clarify. Getting rid of experience points only does you a favor. The tracking of experience points means you have to provide the game master with a threshold which you are aiming at, and only when you achieve that number of experience points do you earn the privilege as a player to advance your character. Now, that's the standard. It's what we've been used to. It's what's going to feel comfortable. But I'm telling you, honestly, a system can be made that allows for constant and continuous advancement, as we're going to, whereby the storyteller is not involved in the advancement of the character. Yeah. Hey, I get it. Crickets here. What? That makes no sense. The issue here is that advancement in the NycosRPG and in this new mechanism that I think is going to change the way people play games. This new mechanism means that every time you attempt a skill, whether you succeed or not, that skill will advance. Because the reality is if we're trying to learn to do something and we practice it, if we are utilizing it in the game dynamic, we are therefore obviously practicing it. And in any case where we are working on something and we put some effort into it, we are getting better. We are either learning from our mistakes or we are seeing where we've succeeded. So the idea here is that there will be continuous and endless advancement for player characters. So the persona in the game, as you accomplish a task, as you fail at a task, that task's difficulty level is reduced. You actually get a little bit better at doing it, therefore your skill improves. You'll see how it goes here in a minute. This idea, therefore, of getting rid of experience points is only lifting away from the game master the burden of determining a scaling process that requires him to put monster type into CR and then doing a calculation and then determine how many experience points each one is worth divided by the number of players, blah, 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 blah. And it makes the scoring of the game, the advancement of the game, unfun for anybody. The player wants to advance all the time. Every session you're in, you want to be getting better. But you can't see that unless you gain experience points. And the storyteller might be using a milestone, or he might be using a flat base, or he might be doing an accelerated base. There's so many different ways that he can calculate experience points. But that, again, is putting a burden on him and taking away the agency of the players because they can't advance as they get lucky or as they get successful or whatever. And so having a methodology that allows for something other than an experience points pool is going to be good. So now we're going to switch and talk a little bit about the advantages of the system that we're talking about, this NycosRPG. So we're going to start right there where we just came from. No experience points, great. But if I'm a player in the game, I want to be able to advance, right? We want to be able to get better at the things we want to get better at. So if the game gives you the opportunity to advance a skill once per session, for every skill that you use in game, three things happen. Number one, you're going to try more things because if you've got more options of things you couldn't advance, you'll try to advance them all. Now, if you can. Number two, you're going to be advancing the skills that are most commonly used first to make sure they get to a serviceable level. And you'll understand what I mean there in a minute. If you're learning how to ride a bicycle, you want to be able to know that when you get on the bicycle, you can ride it in any terrain. So therefore, practicing your bike riding in rougher terrain makes you better at riding the bicycle, and that experience confers over to being better in any environment. So the concept of conflict and challenge causing you to use your abilities, your skills, then those skills are going to advance. Now, the stepped way in which advancement occurs is only an incremental way, simply because it, again, emulates what is in real life. When we are attempting to practice a skill, we get out and I'm going to work on lifting. So I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go lift some barbells or whatever. That process of doing that action does improve my ability time over time, but it's only when I'm actually doing it that I can experience that growth. So I know there's a lot of us that had New Year's resolutions that we were going to spend time in the gym this year, and here it is June, and I don't know how many of you are still on your resolutions. Bless you if you are, and bless your heart. Bless your heart if you haven't. Those of you from the Southwest know what I'm talking about. The Southeast know what I'm talking about. Bless your heart. The concept here is that the advancement is stepped only to allow it to be a gradual process. So, because we don't want to, get through. How many of you? How many of you play video games and know how many hours it takes to complete a certain kind of a game? Yeah. When you play video games and they have that kind of a mechanism in there, you have to grind, right? You have to go and do something over and over again. Well, this is going to be more enjoyable than that because the advancement is constant and fundamentally endless. Because even if let's say you get lucky and you've advanced until you have 95% in any given skill, that still gives you a billion other things that you could be practicing. So maybe you've learned how to use your sword and shield, but what if you use the sword and shield and you specifically are now going to learn how to disarm your opponent? That can be a new skill that you add, and so you're never running out of you're never running out of things to advance. And so this system affords an endless advancement opportunity, which means that characters don't have to be retired out at Paragon level. The game master doesn't have to throw up his hands because there's no monsters that a player can be challenged with above that level because of their near godlike Paragon status. Instead, the number of skills and the number of possibilities goes on and on and on. And the same with the villains and the monsters and the dangers. They also can be from wholly new angles that haven't even been considered. And there's a whole lot more coming to that. But actually, that leads directly to my next point. There aren't any genre limitations, which means the NycosRPG mechanism is available and will be releasing new genre packs called system books over the next few months and years. And those system books will cover the details of how to administer a game in a dozen. Right now, I've got 7 that are already on the docket. So, actually, nearly infinite number of potential genres, because each genre is going to have its own unique skills list. It's going to have its own methodology for the use of those skills. There'll be ways to do comparatives between them, and there's so many things that allow for there not to be any limitations. The players can literally learn in any genre, and many characters can simply move from one genre to the other because they're generalists, and that's a whole other ball of wax. Now, all of that has led up to this next part, and that is that the combat round is changing because the idea of combat has changed. If any of you have watched a recent, as I say, my tongue on my cheek, a recent gunfight, like in a John Wick's movie or Ocean's 11, the dynamic structures of the way conflicts occur are considerably more sophisticated, more cinematic, quicker, actions-packed, exciting. Whereas if you go back and look at classic war scenes from World War II, movies that were made in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, combat was a slog. People fought with roundhouse punches. There was a lot of back and forth as the hero could hold his own even against, myriad enemies. But the point is that the combat slog in a role-play game that we are all familiar with, and I know that many people will pick on the Dungeons and Dragons franchise in particular, but it doesn't matter. Any combat system where there is a pool of hit points that have to be taken away, it leads to a combat slog because the success opportunities are against a smaller amount of damage, and therefore it takes forever to just grind through it. This replaces all of that. Second of all, even the way we're going to look at dice changes. Now, you may have seen my QDR videos, and the quantum die rolling mechanism that I established for this is a revolutionary way to look at a single die roll. Most of us know that in most games you have a die roll threshold. Let's say, for example, a armor class of 15. So you need to overcome an armor class of 15. On a flat roll with no modifiers, that would be a d20 roll above a 15. If you have modifiers in the right statistics, then you would also get a modifier, which would bring that 15 maybe down by a +3 to a 12. So now it's a 12 or better. It's still a single threshold. You still are just that one number matters. You got to be over that 12. Well, the NycosRPG, the quantum die rolling mechanism says this. One dice roll is going to generate 5 or maybe even 6 possible responses. And what I mean by that is that every die roll is going to be determined looking at it from a new perspective. The die roll is going to be considered against not only your original die roll value, but a double up and what's called a double down. A double up is literally twice the threshold, and the double down is 1/2 of the threshold. I call it double down because double down sounds cool. I know it's halving down. So halving down and doubling up, but it's double up, double down. That gives you three threshold numbers within the die roll. So if you roll a d20, you roll percentage dice. NycosRPG is based on percentile dice because it's more intuitive, and we comprehend what 40% of something is. We understand that number easier. So you're going to be rolling. Let's say the threshold is 40. Your original threshold was 40. That's your skill level. Then a double up would be 40 times 2 or 80%. Your double down would be 40 divided by 2 or 20%. So that 20 to 60 window, the 20 to 80 window is 60 points. Yeah. What's important about that, therefore, is that your chances of rolling the proper number is increased. And here's why. On a roll of 20 or below, that is a nominal or straight success. You've gotten to your threshold if you roll that number or lower. If you have succeeded in rolling below the half value, or in this case 20, then your success isn't just a great success, it's a wild success. That counts, if you will, more than your initial success. And so therefore, now you get additional benefits for having succeeded even better than expected. And there's also the possibility that you've rolled over your 40. But the number over 40 could be 40 to 80. So that gives you a 40% chance of a partial success. And if we think of the way we live our lives and we do things, we try to do a good deed and we fall short. Maybe we only fall short a little bit. So this game takes that into account and offers kind of a grace to the players, if you will, because they can get some benefit of success by reaching a partial. So now you've got partial, full, and wild success. Well, then it gets to even be more. A perfect success or complete success occurs when you roll exactly 0, 1 out of 100. 1 out of 100 is pretty special. And in the number of games that I've seen dice rolled for, it's pretty significant when you get that 1%. So there's always that golden bullet, that 1% that is a absolutely complete success. We'll go more into these in a minute. And then finally, above the double up partial success is the window of failure. And that window of failure goes all the way to 99, in which case there's also, in certain cases, an absolute failure. And so you got absolute failure on one side, complete success on the other, and then we've now got a spectrum. And this concept of spectrum is literally what I mean when I say quantum die roll, because with one die roll, you're actually hitting potentially 5 windows, and the variation in your skill changes the aperture of that window of potentials that you might roll. So I know I used a couple of technical terms there, and there's a complete video on QDR. I recommend you go look at. The link for that is right up here. Leave my finger here for a second. That way I can catch it on the video and make sure I put in the tag for it right there. And those of you that are on the audio, there is also already one of the Game Master Soapbox Edition episodes that covers quantum die rolling, and I'll mention that again near the end of the show to remind you again. But that's what that does. Now, combat rounds are going to change only because the combat sequence is going to change. Those players who are doing an action that is a combat action are the only ones that really need to worry about the concept of a combat round. Generally speaking, anybody who is doing an action that is not actively swinging at your opponent is not in combat. Generally, if you're swinging at someone or shooting an arrow at someone, well, let me rephrase that. Even arrows are not considered to be a combat action because they can be done from a distance. So the only real combat actions are active responses to missile attacks or hand-to-hand combat. So other than that, there is no need for all the nuances of a long-term sequence, initiative roll, move your dice, move your mice, make your attacks, choose again, and go on. We're not going to do any of that because we don't need to. Instead, we're going to roll against our relative success of our fighting skills. And the opponent is going to do the same thing, and then each player is going to compare against their relative skill. Well, this process means that if we've got 5 options on either side with the double up and double down values, then your propensity to get to your success is still going to be high. For example, let's say we hit the 40, you're going to get a success even all the way down to that 78. You're still getting a partial success. The difference will be that where you stack up against your opponent is going to decide whether somebody wins or somebody loses. And a fight scene doesn't end until one of the sides loses. Now, notice that if you're fighting in a group of people, you can have, therefore, 2 or 3 different losses in the same game and still not lose the battle, because as long as somebody's still fighting, the quote battle is not over. But it does allow us to see that moment when a player gets an edge over his opponent, or maybe the villain has actually gotten an edge over one of the players. That doesn't mean that the fight is over, but what it does allow for is when there's been a success and a failure in the same round, the failure must suffer a consequence, and the consequence is in the form of a condition placed on them by the successor. Now, I'm not going to go into that here at this point. Just know that therefore means that on any given round, you could theoretically have a fight over in 2 or 3 rounds and not even have done much damage to each other at all, because you may have actually lost the battle before you started. So there's a whole lot more to that in the QDR video, and we'll talk more about that also in the combat section when we get to that for Game Master Soapbox. Now, the final thing is that the opportunity for this is therefore every adventure now becomes a golden minefield. My players have told me for some time that, hey, Strigley's back. Everybody say hi to Strigley. Strigley says hi. Strigley's one of the persons that stopped in and subscribed to my channel, and yeah, nice to see you too. I've been here. Many of my episodes have been like a half an hour to an hour, so I haven't been around as long as I have been in certain other cases. But I am definitely glad to see you tonight. Awesome. We are almost done with my official broadcast part, so let me get done with that so that we can get this in the can and send off to the podcast. So give me another moment here. So my players have told me, probably for the last 2 years, there's been quite a bit of controversy as players have argued back and forth. We'll get there, Strigley, I promise. My players say that there are two schools of thought. There is this first school of thought that adventures in a role-playing game are a railroad train. And that train track runs along the way the direct game master wants it to go. And it's generally linear. It generally has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's all there is you must follow that course. And in that case, the game master is the train conductor, and he's running it as a railroad. Players can't get off, they can't change course, they can't do something that's not on the list of approved actions. And the train, yes. Yeah, the train needs track options. Yes. This is important, but the point I was making is that players think of railroads or they think of sandboxes. And the sandbox is the very opposite. And that's literally the game master sets up the boundaries, sets up the ground rules, and then the players go where they want to go and do what they want to do, playing in the sandbox that the game master has created. And there's problems with that as much as there are problems with the railroads, in that players sometimes are listless, or players aren't digging for new information, or if the game master does share something with them, they shy away from it because they don't want to get caught on a railroad, and so therefore it becomes problematic to have either one of these ideas. Well, one of my groups came up with this. They said, Jonathan, your game is like, start off with the platform and it looks like it might be a railroad, but the players look across the landscape and they see you've provided adventure hooks at galore. They can go in any direction they want. So then they sort of feel like it's a sandbox. And they see all the shiny objects that are laying out across the sand of this sandbox. But Jonathan, as they start to follow you down the course of one of those towards one of those treasures across the sand, they start to notice that the story is going on around them and the ground is shaking and they are being drawn into the story. And so their sight on their shiny object that they were aiming at slowly drifts away. And if they're not careful, they'll be swallowed up in the sand of the story. And so you've created, if you will, a minefield. The word they used was a quicksand pit. You've made a quicksand pit, a golden minefield, and then covered it with treasures. So the players can have all these things they can look at, but if they try to chase any one of them, but they're not paying attention to the story, they're going to get sunk down into the mire and forget what they were going after, and pretty soon they can't even see it anymore. So every adventure can be a golden minefield if you can learn how to present the story. And then what I consider myself to be is a sandbox that's on a shifting base. So as the players draw interest to a subject, that subject slides to the middle, and then the box shifts underneath them as they move towards it. And therefore, they can get closer or farther away as the story needs to implicate. So therefore, the players are not feeling burdened by the story, but the story does start to occupy their time. And so it becomes this golden minefield. And the benefit of a system like that is that the players still have agency. I have players that say, yes, we could go save the orphanage, but the problem with saving the orphanage is that we're not going to be able to go get that weapon that's going to kill the dragon. If we don't kill the dragon, many, many more people are going to be hurt. So we're going after the thing that killed the dragon. So they make moral and social decisions in the game, and therefore are able to chase their agency while fulfilling the things of the story that I lay before them. So this NycosRPG mechanism, which is what I'm proponing, and this is what Strigley's going, I don't know what you're talking about. This system is so innovative that it's sometimes hard to see. And I've done a couple of videos about the specific pieces, but I thought I would do one for the podcast that would clearly define what it is that is changing, so that you can talk about it with us. And if you like what you see, make sure you click the subscribe button. And if you've got comments from me, leave them in the chat like Strigley here is doing, or go ahead and reach out in comments when this gets to YouTube, because this will be on the podcast as well. So let me go ahead and introduce you again to Strigley. Hey Strigley, this is Jonathan, and we are officially done with Game Master Soapbox's formal broadcast. I will be clipping it at this point and sending it on to the podcast, and then we will continue our conversation here on Twitch. If you want to join us, we're on Twitch every night at 11 p.m. and I'm here from 11 to usually 12, 12:30, 1 o'clock. I think the other day with Strigley, I was up for almost 2 hours. So we're more than welcome to be here with everybody else. So thank you for asking. 11 p.m. is in the Pacific time zone in the United States. So I realize that I've got viewers and listeners from all over the globe, and I know for some people this is early morning, like in Australia, and some people come to us from there, and therefore they're actually talking to me tomorrow, which blows my mind. But I'm a time traveler. They're a time traveler. Either which way. So we're going to officially end the soapbox for today. Thank you for your attendance, everybody, and I'll see you in the funny papers. Right. Okay, Strigley, we are on. How are you doing? As I say, New Zealand Standard. Yes, everybody, we are talking to the other half a world away, and it's six. It's only 6:40 p.m., but it's 6:40 p.m. on Thursday. Gotta be right. Yeah, yeah. See, we just now finished my games group, my live games group. I run a live game in Yucaipa, California, which is up the mountain from me. And we just finished that at 10 p.m. on uh, California time. And that's a day before you. So you are literally opposite the world from me. So that's good because when the aliens do land, if they land over there on your side, you'll be able to tell me in advance, right? I saw there's a show called the Why Files on YouTube, and he did a thing on some extraterrestrials that were seen in Australia, and it was quite funny to watch because they, you know, it's really funny. You see the video of them moving and whatever, and then when you hear them talk, it's like, okay, they are obviously from somewhere else because you have to really listen because. Ah, okay, that's fair. Strictly says, no, I can't. Last time I helped, it created a world virus. Ah, I was wondering about that. I didn't know that you were so close to a certain really big country that got blamed for that. You were selling out to certain large Asian countries? Is that what I hear you saying? Or are you talking about maybe even an earlier virus? There have been NZN ones and things like that, so maybe you're involved with those. The different bird viruses and stuff. But what the heck's going on, Strigley? What's going on in your world? You got any adventures, any games that you're running right now? All right, he's starting to world build on his homebrew. What in particular are you uh, setting up for? Ah, doing the map making. Yeah, yep. Did I ever tell you how I got started with my map? I was so frustrated as a game master with 3 years of running just off of grid paper. You know, you draw graph paper and you only do the undergrounds because that's what everybody wants anyway. So you draw out the dungeons and put in the rooms and decide which monsters go in there and what traps. And well, my players. Okay, so that's a great thing. Get stuck because of knowing nothing about travel distances. Thank you for mentioning that. I am going to have to do that. Let me put it down as a note. We're going to have to do a very specific note show on that. So, are you more of an outside? Gotcha. Lord of the Rings, of course you are. You're in New Zealand. You got that beautiful countryside to go running across. So here are some numbers that I got from a friend of mine who happened to be a horse person. She actually owns horses and does competitions with them. So a man on a horse can travel easily 14 miles in a day. No sweat. I'm sorry. I said that wrong. 14 miles in about an hour. So he can cross 140 miles, 150 miles a day. Okay, so here's the thing. How much time do you want them to be traveling between point A and point B? Once you know the time, then you can look at how fast they can move and then scale appropriately. I'll be honest, your first maps don't even have to be that sophisticated. Your first map could be, down in this corner there is a building, and up in that corner is a forest. And you say you're going to go from this place to the forest. Right. Okay, so the trick here is that you have to think in terms of assuming no encounters. There is a possibility on a given day, if you got a group that are traveling, they could cross that entire 50 miles just going that fast. Well, sure. You can actually you can drop into my Discord and chat about it. Let me go ahead and pop that up, and we can talk about it. And everybody can hear you. If you don't mind going on the air. Get my Discord open. Now that we're past the podcast, we can do that. So I will be in the streaming show audio channel in my Discord, and Wrigley has become a sponsor and is a supporter in the Patreon, and he has gotten access to my Discord channel. So go ahead and hop in whenever you get a chance, or you can just drop it in the art gallery folder on the Discord. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Traveling in Discord time is about like traveling in adventure time, you know? How long does it take for you to get there? Well, how well did your mapper give you description? Well, I said it was in the NycosRPG channel, and I said it was in the, you're going to want to place your art in the art gallery folder. You got to navigate to that. And then if you want to chat verbally, yeah, it's called art gallery, one of the text channels. It actually should be highlighted right now because we've gotten some videos put in there today, so it should be brightly lit up within the channel. It's not going to be anything other than just a regular text channel, but it'll just have the name Art Gallery. Matter of fact, right now it appears, well, I wouldn't know because when you were on, but the Art Gallery channel should be lit. In the meantime, I've gotten 4 games in since Sunday. So Sunday I had a session for my Patreon fans. Then I had my Monday group at the game store, which is Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California. And then I had my Tuesday group, which is also at Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California. And then tonight I had my paid event where I actually get paid to be a game master, and I'd run up to Yucaipa, California, and I was there from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Let me go look just a second. Make sure you got you on the right channel. You may be. I know what happened. Go ahead and put it in Splinter Speak for right now. I know what happened. Find you. Yeah, you could be on, if you're on the NycosRPG, the white circle one, not the black circle one. If you're on the white circle server, there's an art gallery folder. And if you're on the other one, just switch over to this one and then pop up. Oh, okay, cool. I'll move it over to the gallery in a bit. Oh, nice. Which artwork program are you using? That World, whatever. Yep, yep, yep. Very nice, very nice. So let me go ahead and open it up and take a look at it real quick here. Alrighty, so the question would be, I think it's poetic how you've done the same thing that just about every mapper I know does. Is they fundamentally tend to map the northern hemispheres, uh, only because you put the snow at the top. Now I can see how, if I were looking at this from your standpoint, that could also be the southern hemisphere, with the south at the top, given where you live in New Zealand, and being the island in the center. I can totally see that. So, what is your particular question as far as range information? Because I built my map in a completely different way. I actually had graph paper and I mapped it by using the random terrain generator in the back of the old Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay, yeah, so in reference to travel, are you talking about travel by horses, by ships, by airship, by camel, horses, walking on their own 2 feet? Wonderworld, using Wonderdraft, probably. I've got two programs. I have Wonderdraft, which I used for the pretty map, what I call the pretty map of Nikos, and then I have the uh, Worldographer, which is my hex-based map, and it's what I call the real map because it actually tracks all of the natural resources for every hex. Okay, how do you calculate travel in a location? And keeping it to a good scale. Okay, so here's the first thing. Okay, that if you're not using hexes, it doesn't matter. If you have this as a map and this is what you're using, don't bother with it with the other one. I went the other way around. I had Worldographer first, and then I had drawn the pretty map later. But the rule of thumb for travel is that every day of travel on roads, this is on roads in particular, should be about 150 miles. No, 49 miles. 49 miles. 49 to 50. And therefore, when I say hex size, it's 50 miles across the hex. That's what I use for my measure. But the rule of thumb is that every 50 miles or so, there should be some form of community, whether that be a city or a town or a hamlet or a. Now, the map you drew, given the fact that you got names for whole forests and such, let me go back and look at it again. So, for example, let's assume for just a second that your entire desert, the bottom corner, what's it called? Erased waste. Let's say that area would equate to 1 hex, if you will. That would mean there'd be a port down at a place like Bottom Drop, and there would more than likely be a population center or something near the crackling shelf. And the erased wastes would be difficult terrain, which means it would be hard to cross, but as the crow flies, it is exactly, say, at 50 miles. Since there is a river running through it, by the way, that's also a movie based in either Australia or New Zealand, a river runs through it. The passage by a river going downstream would be about 50 miles in a day. So that would work out. That would mean that there was basically no other population centers in that area. Now, if this is your beginning map and you have not filled everything out yet, there may be other stuff going on in that space, in which case then you could expand the space out, and then it's literally how far you want them to be apart. If you have no idea what you have for a range, and you're using a map like this, my recommendation would be to assume that the names to the names is roughly 50 miles. That's my recommendation. That's just from me looking at this very first time, first blush. That would be my recommendation. If right, if those names that I mentioned, you want them to be major points, then you would possibly want to put some form of waypoint halfway between them. In which case, then that would be 2 hexes in width, or 2 days traveled by horse on a good day. Well, okay, so if you're talking about major cities, which of those on the map are major cities? Give me a list of 2 or 3 of them so I can do some comparisons. No, give me just the major cities first. Rattle off which ones are the major cities. Just give me 2 of the major cities then, and I'll. Sure, because I can't tell from the map the size of the city unless the names are supposed to be indicating size. I would think that your city near the middle called Morale is the major city. Ice Slice maybe and Bora Groves, would that be right? There's not one in the center, unless Label is its name. That was it's a humor. Okay. So if you don't have any city names on there yet, and those are all different regions, generally you're going to want at least one full hex to be that region. What kind of pick any one region? Let's go with that sandy place at the bottom that I mentioned. Let's assume we're just talking about that space, that area of the map, which you call the erased waste. What kind of monstrosities, what kind of creatures do you think that it would run into in just the northern part of the erased waste, not including the archipelago down below it, just the main part of the body where the crackling slice and the crackling shelf and the bottom drop are? What kind of horrors await them if they're in that area? Do you imagine? Is it one big bad, or is it a whole group of them? Oh, okay, so you're gonna start at the other end of the spectrum. You start up north. Okay, that's fine. We can work on whichever piece of the map you want to work on. So we're going to be looking up north. Then, so I see the frozen carapace and the murdered snow. So I would think that the ice slice would be 1 hex, the frozen carapace would be 1 hex, and murder snow would be a 3rd hex. So you have 3 hexes of frozen lands. That gives you 3 perhaps different random monster lists. It would give you 3 different major big bads to put in. It would give you 3 different primary campaign targets. So in the murder snows, maybe there's a mountain fortress. In the ice slice, perhaps there's a hidden cavern for some sea creature. And then in the frozen carapace, let's say there's a race of particularly nasty trolls. So therefore, you've got 3 different areas that have a primary villain type, but you could have a lot of other creatures that live around them, as an example. Just from the standpoint of the way I work my hex maps, that would be my recommendation. Something along that line, if that makes sense. One hex is days traveled by horse on a road. Therefore, the ice shelf, the ice slice, is going to be difficult terrain because you don't have any roads mapped out. Of course, you put roads in, that'd be fine. We're taking a commercial break. Well, that's fair. You don't have to. That's the reason why I'm trying to say. Therefore, if it's difficult terrain, you add half again. So that would literally mean it's a day and a half across that terrain if they're crossing it on foot. No, I said that wrong. I totally said that wrong. Cross one hex normally is 2 days on foot and 1 day on a horse, because horses make travel that much more efficient. So if if that is difficult terrain, then it would be 3 days to cross instead of the standard 2 days. And that would be each section would take that much time to cross over it. Yeah, I think your region of hex will work, especially at first. Definitely. I wouldn't do more than that because it'll get confusing for you. See, on Nikos, there are each hex is 50 miles across, and let me see if I can pull up the map. I'll show you. Grab a picture of it here. Hang on. The problem with having as many files as I do is that there it is. Just a second. Alrighty, so show you on my map here. So each of those spaces is a hex. The different color coded shapes. So country of Mantara covers a bunch of hexes across. Then Corum takes up a bunch of hexes. But any one of these little spaces on here is what I would consider to be a biome hex. That's a way of thinking about your map making. So if you use your regions, what you're calling regions, as a biome, then the types of creatures that would be found there are going to be homogeneous across that biome and different from the next biome over. So in your ice sheets, you'd have 3 biomes: the murder snows, the ice slice, and frozen carapace. Over in the Boro Grove, since you haven't mapped it out, there are basically 3 different colorations I could see. So that would be 3 biomes there, so 3 zones. And I wouldn't use the word hex for what you're doing because these are not hex based at all. Instead, I would just say it's zones. So Marali would be the entire island or subcontinent, continent, whatever you want to call it, is a biome. The Moss March could be 2 spaces of biomes: the really dense forest and the marshy outer one. Mosh Pit would be 1, maybe 3 if you include the castle emblem that you have on the north end. On the, what it looks like would be your north east corner, and then the one with the mountain on the northwest corner. That'd be 3 for the Mosh Pit area. Then you've got that unnamed forested area above it. It could be up to 3 because you've got the 2 dense forests and the thinner forest, and so on. Again, this is only for understanding the ranging of your monsters and what your travel requirements are for your players. I hope that makes sense. I'll get this map up for now. Get out of the way. Yeah, so I would go with 1 hex, 1 region. It also matters on whether or not the players are hoping to have a survival type event versus a modular. In other words, if we're going to the killing fields and it's only a day away, then okay, you've got 1 possible encounter on the way. If there's no encounter rolled, you make it to the encampment area. Now you can go into the killing field or whatever. So therefore, make it quick. That also means that you have to really monitor the loot outlay that you provide them to, because the rate at which players ramble will be based on how much that they have that they can use as travel money to go from point A to point B. And unless your biomes are particularly nasty, I could see somebody who wants to globetrot and visit all the different corners and see all the sites. So if you're going to allow that, then just realize that your economies are all going to be shifted by high dollar, high roller players coming into town with pockets lined with gold and silver. If you've let them loot a couple of pretty good places, they'll have enough dough to pretty much buy the town. So, okie dokie, I'll go take a look at the other map. Just looks right back. Okay. Yeah, so I would just say, just go with the biome names as the principal terrain feature or whatever. So, Verp is an island, and Lavathroa, and have each one of those be its own separate biome, and therefore you create a wandering monster list for that area, and you have your primary villains included on that wandering monster area because there's a possibility they're out in Gallivant. But if you do it that way, then they know that if they're traveling from Murder Snow, it'll be 1 day to get to Lavathroa, but if they're going all the way to Mount God or the Blood Rivers, then that's going to be 1, 2, 3, pretty much any direction they go before they get there. That's 3 days of travel. And then you roll on each chart only as applicable as they pass through that terrain type, that nation. That works pretty good. Seems logical to me. That makes sense to you? Yeah, and that way, especially when you're first starting, don't overthink it. And see, I had been playing for almost 2 years in 1976, 1977, and I was every week sweating over the underground maps because that's what everybody played back in those days, with the dungeon crawls. And I absolutely hated it that they would come in and slaughter my monsters, and then I'd draw another map, and they'd spend their time working to not go into that map, and so they'd go off in farther directions. Sure. So you're right. Maps are normally for your own benefit, but when you're playing in the fantasy realm, when you're 11 years old, you're not thinking that far ahead. You're not thinking about whether they might be in reference to anything else, and so you just kind of work on whatever area you're in, map it out really good, so they can, when they go to figure it out, it's all covered. But then they turn around and walk away from that direction, and they go someplace completely else. And so I decided in the early spring of '77 that I was going to draw my own map, and I started from scratch on a piece of. It was then TSR Wizards of the TSR, not Wizards of the Coast, and I bought a piece of graph paper from them. They had a set that was put up by the Judges Guild, and it had all the hexes marked out with hex numbers, and I drew the entire map over 3 pieces of hex paper. That's why the map kind of looks funky, is that it's 3 separate countries, Yarlum, Gralum, and Nordlum, and they're all connected. And that whole process meant that I had the entire map done. That way, if they walked in any direction, they got in a boat and they sailed away west, I could look on that map and see where they were going to land. Even if they sailed directly off of the western continent, because of the merits of being a 3D world, they would row into the east side of the map, therefore. So it let me build in the mechanics of it. Oh, there's so much. There's so much goes into it. Woo! I'm glad you mentioned that. Now that you've drawn the map, you're planning to add some detail about where they're going to start and all of that, and then you say, I need to figure out plot, faction, places, etc. Yeah, the way mechanically you'll want to do that in the future. You wouldn't have known this before, but you generally want to start with the plot, then work backwards into everything else. Because if the plot is we're going to a castle, and you only have one castle on the map, and the players don't decide to go to that castle, your entire purpose has been kind of tweaked. So it's far, far better for you to find out what your plot and theme is going to be and then build accordingly. I know you can't possibly know that. I'm excited for you being a new player, but it's one of those situations where MMW, mark my words, MMW, when something happens, you're going to be wishing you had done it in a different order because, phew, I don't envy you the headaches. But you're going to have fun with it. You're going to have fun with it. That's awesome. Yeah, and as far as where the quests come from, you can actually pre-write those just by determining what zone is there, what monster is there, what kind of plant life or animal life that those monsters eat. How accessible is that? Are the animals starved and angry already or whatever? Yeah, but you have to build the quests so they know whether they want to follow them. You have to build the map out in terms of enough text for them to know which direction. And then you certainly can guide or urge them by recommendations. Like, yes, you definitely would need to go to go back to your name so I can use it. You definitely want to take them to let's say they start in the where the frost titan is up north and the murder snows. You know, if that isn't you tend to be one of your BBGs, you don't want them to start in Lavthroa and happen to sail directly north, because that'll put them directly into line with that really big BG. And so, if you're not going to nerf it, you have to find ways to guide them in other directions. And that's when I talked about biomes and guiding them. I'm not saying, pardon me, I'm not saying you're telling them which way to go. You just give them a lot of options, and then the warnings that will keep them going where you want them to go. be my recommendation. Okay. Minefield is as good a name as any. Makes me think of Jane. A town called Jane in Firefly series. Yeah, so by sticking to zones or biomes and associating them with locales, then you can start to figure out your ranges. So now if you know it's a 1 day's travel, then you start to calculate, well, okay, if they're going within a hex, they're going from point A to point B, then you can simply do the subtraction. If they're not going completely out of the hex, then is it a half a hex? Is it a quarter of a hex? And since we know that one hex equals 49 miles, we can calculate how many miles there are. Yeah, I got you. I got you. Town. I can see the little thatched roof houses, and yeah, you could make some multiple biomes. That's fine. And again, I wouldn't use the word hex unless you're going to move this to a hex paper because you'll just confuse people. But yeah, so start them in Mudtown, and then they're going to travel from the Mudtown to wherever. Yeah, that's. Let's see. Did you put Mudtown on the map? Mudhaven, I got it. Yeah. So Mudhaven to storm wreck based on the measurement we just said, 49 miles. It must be about 7 to 12 miles. The mountain range that splits the island in half there to the east would be again about 10 miles across, and so on. Yeah, that'd be fine. It works. Oh, cool. Cool. So therefore, you know that when they're done, it's just a couple-mile walk down the beach or through the bog, however you want to say it. So that gives you an idea how far they have to go for actual help, so that if they get injured or sick or whatever, and they need to get to civilization, you know how far they are. Makes perfect sense. So, yep, that's in answer to your question. That's the way you do it. You kind of, uh, it's a little bit like quantum physics. In quantum physics, you look at something to get its measurement, and then once you have that measurement, then the measurement helps only then in the abstract, because once you're no longer looking at it, the measurement no longer applies. The reality is that if you are not aiming at the ice place, you're not thinking about it, it might as well be all the way on the moon, right? It doesn't much matter. It's only when they actually ask and matter that it matters. So decide for yourself at the beginning of the session how far you think it's going to be, and therefore that changes the scale. The trick is once you start running for a group over time, they'll start to get an idea of where those places are. Right, you're exactly right. It's not about accuracy. It's about general distances and what the players will interpret. But my point being is that if you say that to them that it's 10 miles from here to the shipwreck, then they look at that map and they go, well, it can't be much more than 10 miles to that mountain range. And you go, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's about 10 miles. And then it's about this many miles to that other thing. And so you start to build their awareness of your country, their awareness of it. This is really the most important part of this. It's never about what you as the game master wants them to perceive. It's what they successfully perceive about your world. And the more feedback you get from what you create in terms of map and stuff, the stronger and more powerful you'll be seen in the future, because you will be able to push back, because you say, well, no, according to my calculations, it's only about 6.5 miles. So if you're coming from that hex over there, then it's going to be about 10 miles. So I'm going to give the advantage to the guy that's moving a shorter distance, or whatever. I'm giving an example. So there you go. Custom travel notes describe the kind of terrain If there are no roads, so state, so they know that if they're looking at the difficult terrain, they know how long that's going to take. If they're going to be able to sail around it, and make sure they know that as well. You know, the trick is that if they sailed into any area, generally speaking, they will have met one or more people that are local that can tell you where they are. So, okay, so now here's the thing about roads. Remember what I was saying about distances between villages or towns? That is your default if you have nobody. If you're talking about a flat terrain and nobody has been on it before, then you use that. How far can you travel in a day? So a person on foot is going to travel about 14 miles, and so 14 miles is a third of the way across a hex or whatever. So therefore, you'd be able to calculate. There should be a place to get water and food at least every so often, and in the civilized areas, those will be active waypoints, which means somebody built them and maintained them in the name of the king. And other places, it'll be just like finding it because it's somebody who just like to tell songs. So, okay, so 14 a day on foot. That's with boots. Oh, boats. Boats. If you're going downstream, it's going to be as fast as a horse. Going upstream, it's going to be as fast as a person on foot. The advantage of taking a boat upstream is that it carries more cargo. Sometimes, if the river is narrow enough, you'll have to port the boat. That's literally you pick up the boat and carry it and all the gear up the trail. 49 miles, right at 50 miles. So basically, a pony with a road could travel just about any length of any island you've got there. Even the big ones. That's assuming there's a road and there's not difficult terrain and all that kind of things. The more challenging you make it, the less time they'll be able to make by having the horses. But realize that in the later campaign, it'll be important for them to be able to move from place to place because your big bad's going to. So, alrighty, it's almost 12:30 here. I'm going to go ahead and sign out for the night. It's been great talking to you, Strigley. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody else that stayed and watched with us or will watch this in later video runs. I am Jonathan Albin, and I will see you all next time. And I will be here tomorrow. And I would tell you not to worry about your big bad. Don't worry about your big bad until you see what the bads are. And what I mean by that, I'm jumping in. Yeah, definitely try to watch tomorrow. I'll try to answer your questions tomorrow about the big bad because I've got some serious opinions about that. As a matter of fact, I have a video on how to balance the big bad, so check that out. It's on. You can go to the channel and look for big bad. You'll find it. And I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks again. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe and like the channel. And I will see you all next time. You're not being too annoying. Are you kidding? You are here and asking questions. I work in a dialogue format most of the time, and I prefer that over monologuing. So while I do the broadcast at the beginning, I do also want to be able to have